to have you back here for this final session where we're talking about feedback. And I guess part of this presentation we'll be looking at the idea that there is a difference between feedback and evaluation and what some of those differences are. But also, I guess, drilling down to the idea that feedback really is just an opportunity for your students to respond, react, review and then revise, obviously, their learning, whether that be their knowledge and understanding of key content in your topic, in your subject area, whether it's the strategies that they're using within their learning, or their ways of demonstrating that learning, that you give them an opportunity to improve, to enhance that and to change. Well, of course, we know that students learn when they actually have opportunities to actively monitor their understanding, and that they learn best when they can get timely, regular and constructive feedback on their learning, so that there's lots of checks and balances, if you like, along the way, lots of mini milestones that give them an indicator as to, am I on the right track? So I guess that's the key thing, and that's that first point there on the screen is really critical. The rest, again, we know it's almost like common sense to us as educators. That final point too is just one that I guess is of interest, given the fact that of the discussions that we've had earlier on in terms of assessment design and reporting and feedback as well, is that we know, and the research indicates, that students do become better learners when we challenge them to use higher order thinking skills during the learning process. So very quickly we'll see that we've got some feedback versus evaluation key points there, and again that idea that feedback really should be looking at the idea of fostering learning, of encouraging students. Whereas if we think of evaluation, I guess an easy way to think of that is that, yes, it's conveying judgment. It's a point in time kind of performance indicator for most of us in education when we give that evaluative type of summary of a student's learning in terms of an assessment or grade. So feedback in terms of formative and summative assessment, and what's the rationale and why are we providing this type of feedback? Well, we know that it gets back to this idea of student motivation and the motivation to learn, to excel, and to ensure that they reach their learning goals and outcomes within the subject matter and so forth. So if students can get feedback, and it doesn't always have to be positive, that's not what it's all about, but if they can get feedback in terms of how they can do it better and what they're doing well, and not only what they can do better at, but then some strategies and suggestions in terms of assisting and supporting them in that. Again, the research out there highlights the fact that this is going to be a key motivator in terms of driving students to do better. Of course, also it assists and supports the actual learning experience and the whole learning process. The other points there are obviously fairly straightforward. The feedback, I guess, works both ways as well, which is also an important point, that it's not just educators providing feedback to students, that we also need to think about the fact that as teachers, it's really important that we should be looking at embedding opportunities within the learning and teaching experience and in our classes for students to provide feedback to us. So quickly, we have a feedback sandwich here, and basically the feedback sandwich, I guess, it maintains this trust environment. Students themselves find that this is easier to do when they're really clear about the task at hand. In other words, what the expectations are right from word go, and that needs to be reinforced over and over again. And you'll find then that the feedback in terms of what they've done well or what they think could be improved and how they might do that becomes really clear, because it's all linked back and aligned with the specific guidelines for the task and the learning outcomes and criteria. So here are some key questions that can be used and posed to students. And again, what's really interesting to note is that this self-evaluation of their own ability throughout the course or the content of the delivery of a subject can provide really, really rich feedback. So one quick snapshot, because we don't have time to go through a whole lot within these very short, brief workshops. But one idea of a way that you can actually provide feedback to students in a live class setting, which again a lot of educators think, well, feedback is something that you do post class. What they've been doing at Harvard and other institutions is looking at opportunities within the actual traditional lecture and class to provide real live, timely, constructive feedback to students that can then be used not only by them but by the instructor, by the academic, to make subtle decisions about guiding what is going to be discussed perhaps at the tutorial following the lecture, or what needs to be reinforced and subject matter perhaps we need to go over because there's some key learning and gaps. So it's a feedback loop that they use, and basically in a nutshell what they do is they have a really short sweet lecture session, 10 to 20 minutes maximum, and then immediately built in through specific tools, they have a concept test which gives them some questions to help guide whether they're on the right track and whether they've understood some of the key concepts. Then what the instructor does is offer an explanation of the correct answer, and then students obviously can have an opportunity, if they wish, to discuss or share very briefly, and then we go on with the lecture session content and so forth, perhaps for another 10 or 15 minutes. And then there's another short and sharp test. Perhaps it might only be 5 questions, it might only be 1 or 2, but they're key questions that help to gauge student knowledge and understanding of that session content there live on the spot, so that questions can be asked, so that the correct answer and the correct response can be explicitly, detailed by the instructor if need be. Here's a super quick example that we pulled. We had a test that was carried out on a reading assignment, and we had populations of students just study the passage straightforward, and off they went, and then another population who studied the passage and then took one of these live on the spot sort of concept test to test their knowledge, and had a couple of minutes discussion, not a great deal of time, but a couple of minutes of discussion with their peers, the person sitting next to them or the instructor explaining what the correct answer was. And then 2 days later, both groups were actually tested on their recall of that information, and then they were both tested. So predict the result. Well, 120 students. We had population A there, you'll see, population B. After 5 minutes, population A, you'll be able to see, seems to be coming out on top. They're the ones that read the passage twice. But after 2 days, you'll see that the retention of that information significantly changes, and B jumps up. And then after a week, you'll see that again, Group A has dropped yet again, and yes, that Group B has gone down slightly, but it's still significantly improved in terms of the students in Group A. So just something to keep in mind anyway, that you could think about including when you've got those long lectures and a lot of content that you're trying to get across to your students. So quickly, a model of feedback, I guess we could call it feed up, feedback, and then feed forward. So feeding up, where am I going, what am I doing, and what are the goals? And then the feedback obviously explicitly links back to that. So the question is, how am I going and what progress is being made towards those specific goals? And then the feed forward is where to from here, so where to next. In other words, what do I do? What do I need? What strategies or suggestions or supports do I need as a learner to be able to make better progress or to improve my learning? So we'll now have an opportunity for some questions, and we'll take it from there. Thank you very much.